From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres here. It is, well, Tuesday, and we've got a good topic of conversation. It's something that, hey, it came up yesterday when we were on with Sheriff Hall. That was prior to him dumping that cold water on my head for the ALS challenge, which I think went well. I'm all dried out. But during the program, we got phone calls along that. Last week, of course, we've been following the very latest developments out of Ferguson, Missouri. And this morning, I think we're going to open it up. There was one aspect of this story that we haven't touched on as much as perhaps some of the others, and we've tried to cover it from every angle. As you know, yesterday, of course, was Michael Brown's funeral. That milestone, that moment now, he's laid to rest. Does that change anything? And then beyond that, some new developments that we can talk about this morning. And the topic really of conversation this morning, and we expect to have MTSU journalism professor Larry Beres join us. He may be caught in traffic, he may be caught up, first day of classes for him yesterday, but we want to talk about the media's role in covering what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and whether or not the media actually made things worse. If you think the coverage in some ways, by keeping you up to speed on what happened, made it better, what's your take on the way it's come down? And maybe it depends on where you get your news from. Do you get your news online? Do you get it from the national news in the evening? Do you get it as you watch our different stories here on News Channel 5? Do you read it in the newspaper? Did the media coverage of this fuel the fire that maybe led to some of these violent protests? I'm not sure that you can say one way or the other. I definitely think, and I want your take on this, whenever something like this occurs and it gets this type of attention, a lot of the pundits or the folks, politicians be it, reverends and others from all around the country will make it to this location, sometimes with good reason to take a stand and raise questions about what happened. But other times you get the sense they're going there because you know, or they know, there's going to be the media spotlight on them. And our coverage of this, showing, as you see, the looting, the rioting, and how that played out. Some of the early reports that came out with regard to Michael Brown that I'm not sure were very fair. Allegations about his past history. Initially, right after the shooting came up, and trying to, some say, paint him in a different light than what he was really like. And I think even today we're still trying to learn more and more about Michael Brown's background. Your take on all that, and the question too now about what happens next after the funeral yesterday. And you probably saw on the nightly news the many speakers that were there, talking on behalf of the family. Michael Brown's family members denouncing the video released by police, who say it shows Brown snatching some cigars in a convenience store just before he was killed. In the video, the person said to be Brown is seen grabbing a clerk by the shirt and forcefully pushing him into a display rack. I mean, there's now questions about whether or not some of this video that was released early on was even him. And was it fair to throw that out there and try to paint him with a different brush, which I would say absolutely not. We have to take our time and wait and see how that plays out. Now, where do we stand after the funeral? Does that change much? Maybe things have calmed down in Ferguson, but we know a federal investigation continues at this time. We also know that a grand jury is now trying to determine whether or not the officer involved in this, Darren Wilson, will be indicted on criminal charges. And it's interesting, money is coming in on both sides. The Brown family, I understand, has been the recipient of some $250,000 donated by people around the country in support of the Brown family. The legal defense fund for Wilson is now at $388,000. More money coming in for his legal defense as people anticipate whether or not he's going to be indicted. And we don't think we'll hear from that grand jury for several weeks now. By that time, things could calm down. But I've said this all along. Fair or not, and I don't know the details, and I'm one of those people that wants to wait and give them a chance to look over everything that went into this shooting. But fair or not, when this comes down and the grand jury returns a decision, if they come down with the decision not to indict Darren Wilson, and it might be the right decision, but if they come down with a decision not to indict him, that'll be 3 or 4 weeks from now when things have really died down in Ferguson. It will explode back up again. He's in a no-win situation. He almost has to be indicted. Now, you indict someone, then that doesn't mean they're guilty. It means it moves on possibly to a court of law where it determines whether or not you did anything wrong. You have to wonder if those grand jurors who are from that area are going to say, look, we have to indict him. We can't, otherwise we're going to have another riot on our hands. What do you think? Will Darren Wilson be indicted? If he's indicted, do you think it's going to be because he truly, in the minds of the grand jurors, did something wrong? Or do you think he'll be indicted because the grand jury realizes there's a powder keg there, and if they don't indict, people are going to get very upset and riot all over again? You know, remember, this is all about justice, folks. But sometimes you cannot ignore the periphery and all of these people and the distrust and the frustration that many will feel. If he's not indicted, they'll say the fix was in. How can you not indict him? Again, though, I'm not saying at this point I've reached a conclusion whether or not he did anything wrong. I don't have all the facts, but I can see why people were upset. Anyway, the lines are open, 737-7587. And again, as you see there, we can talk about the latest out of Ferguson. Media coverage is part of this. I'd like your take on how you think the media has followed this story to this point and as it continues to evolve. So we'll take a few calls before we go to the break, but lines are open, 737-7587. Did you watch the memorial yesterday? Want your take on that as well. Let's go to Jack. Jack, good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Hey,
I think that the perspective that people have relative to the media depends upon which media they are watching.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of different types of coverage. One of the things that I found interesting was the number of journalists that were being arrested, which reminded me of during the Occupy Wall Street period when a lot of journalists were arrested and their rights were being violated and nothing was ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this, to me, just shows that the police in America, by and large, are not subject to the rule of law. And I certainly am not prejudging the shooter, that meaning the officer. I don't know what he did. I hope that the process is sufficiently transparent so that as the facts truly come out, that instead of having rioting as a response in either case regarding the grand jury, we'll actually get to know the facts of what happened in a transparent way. But all you have to do is look around the country, and whether it was the guy that was chokeholded to death in New York, there was a guy shot just a few miles from there a couple days later, where the police claimed he was wielding a knife, but the video did not appear to show that.
Yep.
So this is an ongoing problem, and I think it belies the broader problem in our society about rule of law. You know, whether it's Wall Street bankers who can get away with quote-unquote murder with impunity, which clearly is the case, or whether it's police who are always, or 99% of the time, found to have never done anything wrong. Well, there are no group of human beings on the planet that is correct 99.9% of the time. It's just the nature of our species.
Right.
So one would assume that if we had an honest system where the goal was justice and not simply covering the right side of the story, we'd have better results across the board.
Hey, do you think the problem with law enforcement is they're not getting enough proper training, or is it just that they're in such a difficult job that they're going to make more mistakes?
I think it's a combination of training and accountability. I think we have, because of the militarization of the police force, we have kind of a us versus them mentality. And that in and of itself is problematic, especially if you don't have accountability for behavior, so that when you beat someone up or, I mean, after the Occupy arrests in New York City, New York University and Fordham University did a major report on the behavior of the NYPD and had a long laundry list of all the laws that they broke and violated, and nothing was done.
Yeah.
So if there's no accountability, then police will do whatever they so desire, which might not be appropriate or even legal, I might add, but because of the lack of accountability, this kind of extremely violent response to everything is allowed to continue. And I think that is at the root of the problem. And I think that is not a problem just for the black community, but for our country, that we have this very adversarial, militarized idea of what the relationship is between police and the community. It happened right here in Tennessee when those Occupy folks were arrested. There's actually a lawsuit and a trial going on right now as to whether or not the state attorney general acted properly to send in a large number of police with dogs and what have you to arrest a small number of protesters who were exercising their First Amendment rights with literally no notice, and then when they didn't jump, when the police said jump, they were arrested. So this is a pattern in our society that needs to be addressed, and I really believe that it's incumbent upon all of us as citizens to demand higher standards of police behavior. And I'm not condoning any of the rioting or anything that happened after the fact. None of that is appropriate in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not prejudging the officer. But we do need stronger accountability, and we need to have the rule of law be the determining factor, not who you are when you commit a crime.
Gotcha. Hey, listen, Jack, I appreciate your call. Some well-reasoned thoughts there, and get a take of what other people think about what you said. When it comes down to law enforcement, my take on police officers, they're there to protect and they're there to serve. Okay, that's their duty, and we see a lot of cases where sometimes things get out of hand. These instances where excessive force perhaps used, and you have to ask yourself, was it appropriate in that case? In most other cases, and I deal in the media, of course, and I cover law enforcement, the vast majority of law enforcement officers, and I think Jack would probably agree with this, mean well and do good work, and you're glad when they show up when you need them, that's for sure. But when there's cases like this, it has to be investigated, and if things are done wrong, there has to be accountability. There's no doubt about it. What do you think? We'll take a break. When we come back, the number 737-7587. If you're on hold, stay there. We're talking about the latest out of Ferguson, one day after the memorial and funeral for the young man, Michael Brown, who was killed. We'll get your take on that and the media coverage of this. I want to know how you think the media has done in following this story. We'll be back with more right after this.